Thank you very much. Cool. Okay. So it's going to be you're lumbered with me for the evening. Simon's got away on another event, unfortunately, but he does send his love as per the screen you can see in front of you. Um, okay, so tonight the subject is young birds. We're going to have a sort of a bit of a whistle stop tour through this. Um, we're going to go through the whole sort of, well, not the whole element. We're not going to talk about the egg stage in any great detail, but we're going to talk about what happens from when the eggs hatch until the bird actually sort of fledges and a little bit of what happens thereafter. It's another big area. Obviously, it's a huge part of the life cycle of a bird. It's a pretty risky time, and a, a very varied approach that the number of species that we have, the very varied approach that they take in terms of from the egg stage to the fledging stage and beyond. We'll have a little bit of some science, nothing too deep. You won't be tested at the end, so just listen and suck it up, and if any of it sticks, then it'll be great. Obviously, we're recording it again, as Dave said. If you've got any questions, pop them into the chat area, and obviously Dave or myself will try and answer them as we go through. And then when we get to the end of the session, we'll just review the weekend visits to Lodge Hill, where definitely at this time of the year we'll be encountering some young birds. Okay, so we'll start at the beginning and emerging from the egg. Obviously, given the variety of sizes and shapes of birds, the eggs obviously vary in size and also in shape as well, generally being oval, but razorbills have a very pointed egg so that they spin round in very small circles on the ledges that they nest on. But the sort of, if you think about the size of a hummingbird, then the eggs range in size from what they lay from, which is much smaller than our 5 pence piece, and to larger than, well, it'll feed you for a whole day if you have an ostrich egg sitting on your plate. They are absolutely massive, and all sizes in between, and all colours, all shades of the rainbow. Something that could be a subject of its own at some stage in the future. So with eggs varying that size, obviously the thing that comes out of them is going to take an awful, they're going to vary in time, from hatching to when they leave the nest, and when they can start feeding for themselves, and when they move off and become completely independent. So things that the quickest ones that we know of tend to be something like the white eyes, which are like small warblers on the Eastern Asian side of things, and they can vary from 9 to 10 days from hatching to fledging and becoming independent, to over 80 days when you think about a wandering albatross and where it is, the temperature around the nest generally, and the amount of time it brings that bird to actually hatch, um, uh, to become a hatchling as such. So 80 days is 2.657 months. So that's a huge amount of time. So it gives you some idea in terms after that, in terms of how long it will be before they actually fledge. Um, and most birds, the vast majority of birds, passerines especially, will build and use some kind of nest. Some of them are the most basic things that you can imagine, and they can literally be just a couple of sticks on the ground, through the most ornate sort of nests, which tend to be on the ground as well. Things like bowerbirds, where they have an entry and an exit stage. They have grass growing that's shaped around by the birds around the nest area itself, and they adorn these nests with things of the similar sort of colour to their own particular plumage to try and attract the female in and lay in that particular nest. And our own magpies will also adorn their nests as well, and build the nest or take over a nest of a squirrel or something like that, and then bring in all sorts of shiny objects to adorn the nests. And then you get the really big structures that have, well, literally, I mean, they will add to them every year. So some of the eagles, the white-tailed eagle, golden eagle in this country, or the UK, and ospreys and birds like that, they'll add sticks and twigs to that nest on an annual basis, and probably some fresh material for the inner lining of the nest for the young to sit in. And some of these nests get so big over the period of time that they have been known to eventually topple the tree that it's lying on, and obviously bring it down, which is a bit of a shame. But then they start all over again. One of the nests was recently in Canada, and one of the nest sites that they showed us for bald eagle was over 150 years old. That had been recorded, so quite amazing. But not everybody uses nests, or not everything uses nests. Some of them actually bury their eggs, like in terms of the megapodes, and others that lay their eggs on cliff edges and in burrows and in holes, and some just lay their eggs in other birds' nests, such as the cuckoos and the brood parasite species. So it's much and varied. And so you know that the next stage, the nestling stage, is going to be equally varied. To just get some terminology right here, or just make sure we're all singing from the same hymn sheet. So we've got the eggs, and developing. And the bird is developing inside a protective shell. When it hatches, it is called a hatchling. And in the vast majority of passerines and some of the other birds, then that bird is covered with down. Sorry, it's tends to be almost completely naked. The eyes are closed and can generally only move its neck and its mandibles. It then moves on through that process to become a nestling, where the bird remains still in the nest, and it's being fed, and as a result, it's growing feathers. Its eyes begin to open, and it begins to take on a sort of a bird shape, and starts to partially resemble the adults, while still being fed by them. Once we get past the nestling stage, then this is come to the very risky stage where the bird becomes a fledgling. So it leaves the nest, but is generally still reliant on its parents while learning to fly and feed itself. It'll still probably being fed by the adults generally, although that will reduce over time as it becomes more independent. Moving on past the fledgling stage, then we come to the juvenile stage, and the bird is more independent. It can look after itself. It probably has moved away from the family group, maybe starting to think about migrating if it's a migrant species, maybe learning to its calls and maybe the song of the adult, and it's developing a more adult plumage, which will help it carry it through its first winter, and then into adulthood, where it's fully mature and capable of breeding and starting the life cycle again. Now, well, we're not talking too much about the adult stage. We'll be talking about aging and molt in the next session, which will take us from the sort of the juvenile stage up to the fully adult stage and breeding, which is a topic on its own. But there is a bit of extra science that we can add in, so that there's some other terms here. So the altricial birds. So these, as I just described, when these hatch, they are almost entirely naked. Their eyes are shut. They just lie there in the nest, and the only things they can move are the neck muscles and the beaks, which when the adults tend to come back to the nest with food, the beaks will suddenly open, and you're presented with a huge gape where the adult will generally stuff the food down them while they're very, very young. And it's quite interesting to look at some of these different species that when the mandibles are open, that there's various different patterns inside the beak and tied to the mouth, which tells the bird that this is their species. Certainly happens a lot in the warblers and the tits. The alternative to altricial is precocial, and these species, the birds, the nestling tends to hatch. They're covered with down, their eyes are open, and they can almost certainly run, walk, swim, and generally feed themselves within minutes or hours of hatching. And these sort of species tend to be the ducks, the geese, um, some of the seabirds, and obviously the waders as well, the lapwings, the curlews, and all of those particular species. Now, to add to those two particular terms, then we have nidicolous birds, which stay in the nest for a long time after hatching. And these are the passerines, the raptors, the owls, the herons, and the swifts, and so on. And then we have the nidifugous birds, which leave the nest shortly after hatching. And these are similar groups as the precocial. So nidicolous and altricial cover similar groups of species, but mean different things. And the same with nidifugous and precocial. So, but obviously, being as we are, things are not that straightforward. There's also semi-altricial species, such as some of the herons and raptors, and semi-precocial, subprecocial, and superprecocial. Some of these, so super precocial means species that can fly. Generally, having hatched, they can fly within something like 24 hours of hatching. That's something like the black-headed duck. Subprecocial means that they can leave the nest and follow the adults, but can't feed themselves. So if you think about divers and grebes, coot, moorhen, species like that, so they can swim around following the adults, but they haven't got the ability to fish and feed for themselves. Those are some of the subprecocials. And then the semi-precocial are things like the penguins and the shearwaters and the gulls and terns. So they hatch, they're pretty well developed. They can walk around, but they do tend to stay close to the nest for the adults to come back and feed them. So just some terms there to stick in the back of your mind and probably never hear or use again, but we'll just cover that for the sake of that. So eggs hatch and out pops a hatchling. So this is the bird that has just emerged from its egg. At this stage, it's very vulnerable, and as we just covered in terms of the altricial, then which covers most of the passerine species and therefore most of the species on the planet, then we have no feathers, but maybe a tiny bit of down. And as I say, the neck muscles and the mandibles are the only things that can move. So with the precocial ones, ducks, chickens, etc., they'll got a lot of not proper plumage, but they've got a lot of down, and their eyes are open, and they can start to look after themselves fairly quickly. So the hatchling grows a bit. and becomes a nestling. Now, again, there are lots of different types of nestling. And why are there all these different types? Well, because the parents are different from each other. It depends on what type of bird they are and what type of food that they actually need to eat, to grow. So do they feed on animal prey, or are they vegetarians? And coming back to the example of the grebes and the divers, for example, these guys are fish eaters. They dive, and they're not great flyers. In terms of, it takes a lot of effort for a diver and a grebe to get out of the water and fly around. So the young wool following them around is far more economical for all of them, to be able to have them following them and feeding them on the hoof, as it were. Whereas on the altricial nestlings, then the parents will be going out, they'll be collecting the food, they'll be coming back to the nest and stuffing it down the nestlings' throats. And you can see there as an example that great tits have been recorded feeding their young 990 times in one day, which is obviously takes a huge amount of effort out of the adults. And the young can sit in the nest and they can focus on putting on muscle and growing their feathers and becoming fledglings as soon as possible. And then you look at the other extreme, and you've got a bird like the wandering albatross, and sometimes they're only coming in twice a week, and the food has been contained within the esophagus and then gets regurgitated as a nice oily, fishy mass of whatever, and it gets shoved straight down the throat of the young bird, and then the adult is off again and leaves it stuck on a tussock of grass for it to wait for its next meal. And then we have the example of emperor penguins. The eggs are laid on the actual, well, they're laid and then they're immediately put onto the feet of the male, and the male will tend to the egg, and then when it hatches out, hopefully the mother will be coming back from her 1 month, 1.5 month sojourn off to the sea to put back on weight and bring some food back for the first meal for the youngster. And then they swap places, and the male goes off and does the same. So larger birds, larger nestlings will generally spend time in the nest, more time in the nest, as it takes them longer to get to a proper fledging stage. They've got generally more feathers and larger feathers, and it takes more energy to grow those and to get to the stage that they need to get to. Interestingly, raptors are incredibly notorious for eating the young of other raptors nearby, whether that's sort of a safety measure or whether it's because it's easy. There was a paper in British Birds magazine back, I don't know, 30, 40, maybe nearly 40 years ago, which was written by some Swedish people, which had surveyed all of these birds of prey in a particular area, and the percentage of young that were eaten by other raptors was incredibly high, something like 70, 80% sometimes. Incredible. But that probably won't affect this harpy eagle chick that's sitting in the nest, as its parents are the largest eagle in the world, and will see off most things that might come their way. So this chick will sit in the nest for over 6 months. And even then, when it's reached fledging, it'll probably sit around the nest for another 6 months, letting its parents feed it until it's fully mature and able to go off and look for itself. I think, incidentally, as you can see, the dots around the bird and in the air are the flies, which you can imagine after 6+ months in the nest eating meat, it can't be a particularly healthy place to be. So the nestling grows all its feathers and it becomes a fledgling. Now, the process of fledging is has got to be one of the most hazardous times in the bird's life. Um, if you're a duck or you're a goose, you hatch. You found you got a pair of legs that work. You're covered in down. You're quite warm, and then suddenly you've got to jump out of a hole or jump off a cliff in the case of the barnacle goose, or jump out of a nesting box in the case of a goosander or a goldeneye, fall to the ground some 20, 30, or maybe a couple of 100 feet. And then you've got to wander off and catch up with your parents and start swimming around and let them feed you. So obviously that's a one risky strategy, but obviously works. But they're definitely reliant on camouflage and the parents to protect them. And waders are very good at doing this. They don't have the large clutches that geese and ducks do. But their strategy, the adult strategy, is to have fewer young, but be much more careful in looking after them and bringing them through to adulthood. And they'll use all sorts of strategies to help the fledglings. The fledglings will hide in vegetation if there's a threat. The adults will attack the threat. They'll use a lot of noise. They'll swoop on them. They'll try and hit them if they can, and they'll also use things like distraction displays and broken wing displays in the case of plovers, to try and distract the threat away from its young. And obviously, these days with the number of crows and corvids and everything else around it, it's becoming more and more difficult in more and more places. So it's becoming more difficult for those species, sort of certainly in places like the UK. But ducks and geese, grebes, or ducks and geese, they tend to have their large clutches, sometimes dozen, 15, 18 eggs. And when they hatch, they're all expected to keep up with the parents. And the reason for the large clutch size is that, they are very vulnerable, and it's not only the things from above that can take them, it's the things from below that they can't see that will snaffle them. So pike and fish like that they will definitely take quite a few, as many as the herons and so on will take from them as well. So the nidicolous um, young tend to rely on camouflage more than the precocial or the altricial, um, sorry, the precocial birds, um, and they will have, various different groups will have different sizes in terms of clutch size. So if you think about the blue tit, the great tit, long-tailed tit, and so on, they tend to have fairly large clutch sizes. Blue tits 8 to 10, long-tailed tits sometimes up to 15. Um, and they'll be relying on getting some of those through to adulthood to keep the numbers up. But they don't have so much in terms of camouflage. They tend to be just sort of more dull coloured than the adults. Whereas things like the dunnock and the robin will tend to be a bit more dowdy, a bit more speckled, blend in with the background, and be able to sit in a bush or under a bush and sort of be generally sort of be inconspicuous to hopefully to most of the threats that we'll be looking for them: magpies, jackdaws, squirrels, even rats and mice as well. But in order then to be fed, then they have to use another method to attract the attention of the adults and make sure they get the food. And so this is takes the form of the birds chirping and cheeping and twittering, and generally from the cover of bushes and trees, which helps to make it a less risky strategy than sitting out in the open, like ducks and geese will do. And then once we get past the fledging process, we're out into the big wide world. Um, the bird has fledged, left the nest. What next? Um, they tend to leave the nest. The feathers won't be fully grown. They'll still be fully feathered. Excuse me. They'll be fully feathered, but they won't necessarily be fully grown feathers. Um, they're mobile. They can walk and hop, jump from branch to branch, and maybe flutter or fly the short distances needed to try and keep up with the adults. But they're still all dependent on their parents, and they're not fully independent. So you'll see them come back. They'll roost together. They may even come back to the nest site to roost for a few days. And these are what we now term juvenile birds. So it's a juvenile is a bird that's in its first plumage, meaning it's in the feathers. It still has the feathers that it grew when it first left the nest, and it's still essentially a young bird. And the plumage will still be potentially different from the adult birds. And this is the case when they start to go out into the big wide world with the adults and start to feed. And one of the common ones around here would be the starling. You see the adults with their nice spotty plumage, with the iridescence and everything else on the plumage, whereas the youngsters are fairly plain pale brown, and they'll just squawk and squeal and just follow the adults around, hoping that they're going to get fed rather than having to feed themselves. Um, the interesting thing about the juvenile plumage is that it's not necessarily designed to last very long. And again, different species have different um, tactics in terms of attaining adult plumage. Some of it relates to the first plumage that the birds have. They have some pale buff or whitish tips to the feathers, and these are designed to rub away fairly quickly, so that if it's not rubbed away by the time the bird leaves the nest, it'll soon rub away as they're moving through trees and bushes and so on, and will leave the stronger part of the feather underneath, which will probably tend to look more like the adult will. Other other species will move as a family. They'll move a short distance, 50, 100 miles, 200 miles, and then they'll sit in a hedgerow, and then the whole family will take a month to go through a full and complete body and wing molt. Um, Species that springs to mind that does this is the redstart. They will just sit in the same place in the hedge for that month, and change the whole of their plumage bit by bit. And they'll have enough food. They'll have food availability will be good within the area that they're in, so they don't have to fly very far, and they can probably walk and get most of the food that they need. Um, and then other species will go through a um, post fledging molt, so that they will then lose either the wing feathers or the body feathers, or in the case of redstart, both sets. And then those will become more adult-like plumages, still not necessarily full adult. Again, some of those plumages will have paler, weaker tips to the feathers that will then wear over the course of the winter, leaving them with the adult plumage that we recognize as a breeding plumage in the spring of the following year. Um, so we'll just go through some of the different plumages of some of the species. And obviously, it's not going to be too difficult to pick out which one's the adult and the juvenile. So the adult blue tits on the right, and you can see that the colours are far more muted. The blues are there, but they're much paler. Um, there's much greater white tips on the wing feathers and the tail feathers, and the head pattern is not as contrasting as the adult there. The white is mostly yellowy buff, and the blue doesn't exist on the top of the head at all. And even the beak is a different colour. The legs are similar, but then they're not as bright as the adults would be. Sticking with the tit family, obviously the adult great tit is on the right hand side, and this is a newly fledged youngster. Again, muted colours, not so much contrast in the head in terms of the whites and the glossy blue black that the adult great tit has. Again, you can see the sort of the gape colour, orangey colour on the bill of the juvenile on the left hand side, and again the leg colour is more muted as well. So here we have the long-tailed tit, and again, much more muted. The It's difficult to tell from the two photographs in terms of the example whether the actual eye ring is duller or not so much, but you can see that the bill colour of the adult is fully black, whereas the juvenile on the right has still got the orange gape that most young birds do have. And this is a group that fairly uniquely amongst the tits and quite a lot of species that you will get other family members helping to raise the long-tailed tit family. So cousins and nephews, not so much nephews, but cousins and aunts and uncles will help the parents to feed the young and to look after them, tend to them, which is quite amazing. And that's one of the reasons why I guess they can have, so much larger brood sizes and bring them through to successful fledging, as there's more than just the two of them helping to do it. So here we have the white throat. The adult is on the right, and the rather fine juvenile photograph is on the left. Now, the bird on the right, the adult, it's the angle's not really great to be able to see the color on the wings and so on, but you can see from the juvenile that it's got the white throat, it's got the rufous on the tertials and the tertial coverts and the edges of the primaries, but you can see that the tail's not fully grown. It's still got the gape, and one of the things to look for in a lot of birds, like for example dunnocks and the whitethroat here and other warblers and passerines, the colour of the eye of a juvenile bird tends to be much darker than the bird of the eye of the adult. So you can see the adult on the right, it's got a dark centre and the pale iris around it, whereas the juvenile is pretty much dark all over, and that can help you to age Small birds when you see them in the field, but beware the light because it's not always easy to distinguish the differentiation. Here we have an avocet, and obviously the adult on the right, and a very fluffy um, but very quite well grown, precocious youngster. It's got the upturned bill, and its plumage is say much buffier and darker, or not darker, but it's much browner than the adult. Although it won't take long for, it'll be a couple of weeks and it'll be about the size of the adult and feeding itself and be starting to look a lot more like the adult. So here we have bird that we might well see. Hopefully, we will see at the weekend and the weekend after. Um, a yellowhammer. So on the right we have an adult female, and on the left we have the juvenile. And you can see there that it's color-wise. I mean, the photograph on the right is a very warm coloration, but the bird on the left does have the pretty well-grown wing feathers. It's got a similar sort of brown on the edges of the tertials and the primary and secondary coverts, but the head pattern is very much more muted in terms of colour. Irrespective of which sex it is, it's just tends to have some of the markings that an adult yellowhammer will have, but is much more streaked and brown and a bit more camouflage than an adult would be. Incidentally, thinking about the warblers, when you see a blackcap at this time of the year, um, the young always have a brown cap, irrespective of their sex. They don't actually develop the black head of the male if they are a male until late winter, early spring. So bear that in mind when you're in the field over the next few weeks. Um, Blackbirds, uh, fairly straightforward, um, but notice the speckled breast on the front of the bird on the right. It's got a black bill. It has no eye ring and is generally much browner overall. It's got the same stance and attitude as the adult, but will look much more like the female, although it doesn't say it doesn't have the yellow beak or the eye ring than an adult would have. So fair, and they can be a lot more blotchy and splodgy than that for the ones that you see in the garden that have literally just left the nest. And yes, Egyptian goose. Not one of my favourites, to be honest, but there you go. It's a young, not long hatched, um, starting to. It's got its own sort of camouflage pattern on the down, but it's certainly very able to walk, swim, and run and chase the adult and start to feed itself fairly quickly. In fact, it looks much nicer as a juvenile than it does as an adult, to my eye. So that's it. They've left home. They've been travelling. Now they want to settle down and look forward to having kids of their own. Um, and we've got to say that they can all now, sort of over the course of the winter, have they become resplendent adults? Well, no, because we haven't mentioned anything to do with aging and molt just yet. Um, so you look at that bird on the left. That is actually a male shoveler, but it's a young male shoveler, and that will actually be what the adult male shoulder will look like over the course of the early or late autumn, early winter, as it goes through what we call the eclipse plumage, but it's basically it's the molt cycle for the for the ducks. So thinking about when you're in the field and looking at doing your surveys or even just being out in the field and bird watching, molt patterns in birds are an extremely useful tool for working out the age of a bird. And bird ringers will use molt scores, and they'll look at a bird and see what sort of molt it's in, and that will help them to age the bird in the hand. But when you're looking at a bird in the field, if you can see some aspects of molt, and then can reference some books or online, then different species have different molt strategies, and they'll molt at different times, and they'll molt different parts of the body or the wings or the tail or whatever at different times as well. So that can help you to identify the species, but also the shape of the feathers. And a lot of birds, the amount of edging on the feathers. If they've got pale edges, then that's a sign that the bird will be in juvenile plumage still, moving towards sort of first year and then adult. And again, the bigger the bird gets, the longer it takes for that bird to actually become an adult and sexually mature. So gulls is a prime example of this, and we'll see something about that in just a minute. But why do birds need to molt? Well, if you take what we've been talking about up to now, we've got a nest. It's made of twigs and sticks and everything else. They've got sharp edges, sharp ends, and everything else. And the birds are constantly turning in the nest. They're rubbing against it. Their feathers are rubbing against it, and the feathers are getting damaged, all to some degree, all the time. They're getting worn. The adults, at the same time, are pushing through bushes and trees to collect much more food than they would normally need to bring it back to the nest to feed the young. So they're getting more wear on their feathers as well, and they're getting damaged. So molt is the process of renewing the feather, whether it's a body feather or a flight feather or a tail feather or whatever. And it's crucial for maintaining the health of the bird and the success and survival of the bird. And it's good for insulation and for its overall health. And it's also, as it says here, it says it's birds go through molt at different seasons, knowing that the plumage that they're moving into in a particular season is for the breeding season. It makes them brighter, it makes them bolder, it helps them to catch the mate that they need in order to succeed in bringing up a family successfully. So, as we say, it's essential for flight and insulation, and preening is a way of looking after your feathers. But if that feather is damaged, you can't repair it. It will need to be replaced at some stage. And I mean the whole process of molt is fascinating between the species. Some birds can replace individual feathers rather than the whole of a wing set of wing feathers because it's broken. These would be the larger birds, and it's about well, it's about it's the whole thing from survival to reducing the risk to ensuring the health of the bird. You think about a bird that's come out of the nest that's going to spend 2 months migrating 10,000 miles. It doesn't want to do that with a set of worn feathers that it gets when it comes out of the nest. And same with the a lot of the adults before they migrate south for the winter. And some of them will put on sort of more feathers in warmer feathers in order to help them see through the winter period when they don't tend to migrate, and they'll tend to stay close to where they've bred. So the whole bunch of reasons which we'll go into next time. And then we talk about sexual maturity and how long the birds take to get to that stage. Then, we've talked about juveniles. Now we're going to start talking about first winter, first summer, second winter, second summer, and so on. And there are gulls, some of the bigger gulls, they don't get sexually mature and become adult until the fifth year. Likewise, with some of the raptor species, they can be anything up to 9 years old before they're ready to reproduce. So it's a lot of time, and they'll gradually become more and more adult-like as they go through this particular process. So it's as I say, it's a fascinating topic. Now, you might love them or you might hate them, but then they are very very difficult at times to separate when they are in non-adult plumage. And as I say, it takes 3 to 4 years to reach maturity and able to breed. But the juveniles tend to be a lot browner. And by the time they get to molt and get into their first winter stage, then they'll start to be a bit more separable from the various other species around them. And yeah, it's something that we'll get to cover in a bit more detail on the next session. Um, so some suggested do's and don'ts in case you do come across a young bird that looks as though it's in trouble, or it's lost its parents, or it's on the ground and it's wandering around, doesn't really look as though it knows what it's supposed to do. Best thing is to try not to touch or pick them up. Step back and look around and see and listen to see whether you can see whether there's an agitated adult or a bird nearby that looks as though it might be the parent of the young one. And as I say, there's sort of distraction display, alarm calls, agitated movements of the adult, and so on can help you to identify that. In the case of young owls, the parents are almost always close by. I mean, they're just good at hiding. So that doesn't mean to say that means that you shouldn't pick them up. They're just if you do have to, then please use gloves or something to avoid passing on any sort of bacteria or germs or your smell, so which might put the adult off. Pick them up in a towel or something, or whatever you have, the coat or whatever you happen to have nearby, and just put them into the shelter of a bush or something like that, so that they're not too far away. The adults know where they are because they're almost certainly watching you, and from that perspective, they'll be able to come down and feed them at the appropriate time, and the birds will soon be able to fly once they've got a bit more strength. So yeah, just sit back and look at the situation and see if you can work out what's going on, and then say just be careful how you handle them if you have to handle them, and put them into some cover somewhere. If you're not happy or confident doing that, then call the RSPCA or call Tiggy Winkles. They'll always have somebody on hand, either to give you advice or to take the what 3 words location and come down and pick the animal up itself. So with the numbers and the URLs there for the 2 organisations. So take a note of those, and yeah, take a photo of the screen, and just if you are fortunate stroke unfortunate enough to come across something, then give one of those a call, and get them out to help you out. Okay, so that's the session. Just going to quickly cover the events over this weekend and next weekend, 14th and the 21st of June. So tracking the input impact group 1, 14th of June, this Saturday coming, and TTI group 2, 21st of June, Saturday after. Going to Lodge Hill, always good to get out there and have a look for skylarks and yellowhammers and corn buntings and various other species, and I'm sure there'll be some young birds on show as well. Hopefully some young whitethroats and young warblers should be in the scrubby areas, so it'll be always a good stroll. Timing sort of 06:30 to 09:30. Try and arrive between 06:15 and 06:30. So get your shoes on, boots on, and so on, getting ready so that we can go get away sharply at 6:30. As most of you will know, the area, it's arable fields, it's hedgerows, and there's a bit of some scrub and chalk downland. So without the even with the birds, there should be plenty of butterflies and orchids and all sorts of goodies to look at as we're walking around. Getting there, if you're coming in from the 4010, which I guess most of you will, take the turning, which is, I think it's signposted for Princess Risborough Golf Club, or it's onto Lee Road anyway. You go over the railway bridge, and then up the road, and the car park is about 200 yards up on the left-hand side, and the gate it should be open, and then it's about 150 yards down to park by the barn, but not next to the barn. So if you can park on the opposite side of the gravelly area away from the barn, to make sure that the farmer's got access to his buildings. Looks like a warm morning on the 14th, and hopefully sunny. So remember your suntan lotion, and it should be all right for walking boots. I don't think you're going to need wellies at this stage of the year. So have a great time, and looking forward to the weekend after, when I'll be leading TTI Group 2 to the same location. As ever, thanks to all those who have knowingly or unknowingly supplied some images, and the references taken from things like Birds of the World and other bird books that I happen to have got in my collection. Any questions? I don't know. I haven't looked.
We have one from Colin.
Yeah.
So thanks, Colin. It's, why does the bill colour change? Is this a sign of maturity to other birds?
It's.
I was thinking of the rose. I think of the roseate turn, Dave, where it'll go from black to orange, or black and orange at over the season. And I can understand feathers changing because
Yeah.
they're wearing out, but why would the bill color change?
I think, I don't know for exactly why. I think the bill color changes to show its breeding condition, whether it's ready for breeding or not, because it's quite a dark bill in the summer, and it's a bit paler in the winter. And that may well be as a condition of the type of food it's feeding on during the course of the year, but don't quote me on that. But certainly it's part of the condition. It's like the puffin. The winter puffins, their bills are much duller than they are in the summer. So again, whether that's partly diet, or whether it's just the physiology of the bird that tends to increase the whatever it is that goes into the bill to make up the color, to show it's in tip-top breeding condition.
almost like the flamingo. Then where with the pink plumage. You're saying
Yeah,
what it eats
yeah,
might determine its color.
yeah, yeah. But certainly whether it's based on the food supply or whether it's based on something else, the changing the bill and increasing the color or changing the color is a sign of breeding condition.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Any other questions for
Anybody
Dave?
other questions?
Before we let him go?
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Well, thank you very much,
All right.
Dave.
No, pleasure. Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks all for attending.
Thank you, Dave.
No problem.
Thank you.
See you in the
Bye-bye.
field at some stage.